Hello, my name is Azra, and I'm here to talk to you about the education gap here in the state of Connecticut. In the state of Connecticut, there's a vast gulf between the quality of education in the state's wealthiest school districts and the state's poor school districts. Now, Governor Malloy has come up with a plan, and in this plan, there's a new funding formula where it would take into account how many students are registered at each school. In the past, if a school district population shrank, its budget didn't, nor would that necessarily increase the budget for a district that added students. The new formula would also change how the state measures student poverty. According to the governor's office, they've said that this new measure could capture a larger amount of poor students. Malloy also proposed a 1/3 shift of the cost of teachers' pensions from the state to the local governments. That would relieve the state of about $400 million it now spends each year. Taken all together, the changes that Malloy would want to make is basically cutting a lot of state funds, including money for education, which is a huge loss, for 138 towns here in Connecticut. Funding would increase for 31 cities and towns, although the increase would be very modest. Increases of around $10 million would go to the poorer cities, which includes 11 towns. Hartford would get the biggest increase, more than $47 million, and Waterbury would receive $43 million increase in their budget, both cities of which have a substantial amount of poor families. However, the proposal also involves cutting the budget of some towns, such as the town of Fairfield, who, in this plan, they would lose $7.6 million under that year. The approach that Malloy is taking here with this budget is called the Robin Hood approach. Basically, with this approach, he's taking money away from the richest, who are perceived as not needing that money, and he's giving it to the poor people who need that money the most. And to you, I ask, does that plan make sense to you? Now, according to another article by The Atlantic called Good School, Rich School, Bad School, Poor School, Connecticut is one of the wealthiest states in the Union. Yet thousands of children in Connecticut attend schools that are known as the worst schools in the country. Just to give you a perspective of it, Greenwich spends $6,000 more per student than Bridgeport, according to the State Department of Education here in the state of Connecticut. The discrepancies between high-income towns and low-income towns occur because public school districts in Connecticut are run by local cities and the town, and they're funded by local property taxes. High poverty areas equals lower home values. High poverty areas equal lower home values and a collection of less taxes, so they can't raise as much money as people who live in higher income towns. And the inequality between wealthy and poor school districts still ceases to exist because education is paid for with the amount of money that the town has. And it doesn't necessarily equal the amount of money required to adequately teach kids. Low-income towns are struggling the most because there are programs at this school that are completely cut, and those programs are completely available to high-income towns. And these programs can benefit their education. New Britain, for example, receives half as much funding per special education program as Darien. And in Bridgeport, to just give you a taste of what it's like for these kids, they're using textbooks that are 15 to 20 years old. In New London, high school teachers have to tape their windows shut just to keep wind out and snow out and station trash cans in their hallways to collect rain. Greenwich's library budget is $12,500 a year versus East Hartford, which is a shocking $0. All that contributes to lower rates of success of poor students. Connecticut recently implemented a program called NextGen, which measures English and math scores in college and career readiness. It was measured in 4 towns: Bridgeport, New Britain, Greenwich, and Darien. In Bridgeport, the average was 59.3%. In New Britain, it was 59.7%. In Greenwich, it was 89.3%. And in Darien, it was 93.1%. Graduation rates tend to be lower in the poorer districts, and there's more chronic absenteeism. Connecticut has some of the biggest wealth disparities in the country. Indeed, in Connecticut, the rich and poor districts often butt heads with each other. Bridgeport is in the same county as Greenwich and Darien. East Hartford is poor, yet we have West Hartford right nearby, which is very wealthy. The big question here, though, is how did a state like Connecticut, which had one of the biggest first laws of making public education mandatory, become so divided? And why does such an unequal system exist in a country that puts education on such a high pedestal? I leave you with that. And this is segment 1 of segment 4 on the education gap here in the state of Connecticut. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.